Okay, I just want to thank Film Independent for letting us do this. My name is Robert Greene, and we are here with the great Chris Smith. Chris, how are you doing today?
Very good.
Nice to see you. I do want to start with acknowledging the passing of Mike Shank from your masterpiece, American Movie. What do you want to say any words about one of the most legendary screen presences, maybe in movie history? I think documentary, fiction, everything, movie history.
Yeah, it's you just don't realize time is marching on, right? Like, I remember. It's funny, a lot of people, I think I had more people reach out to me about Mike Shank's passing than anything I've done in my life. So, I mean, I think that's a real testament to how beloved he was and how many people he touched.
And a testament to your filmmaking. I mean, American Movie, I was of the age, I think I saw it when I was like 23, right? So perfect age to be massively influenced by that film. And it's great to see your work continue. Obviously, you've done so much else, but I love to think about this, love Senior in relation to American Movie, because in some ways they're both about filmmaking. They're both about the dreams, the imagination of filmmaking. So there may be a couple callbacks, but I wanted to acknowledge Mike. And
yeah, for sure.
It's amazing how much he meant to all of us, which is a strange thing, but it's very powerful and true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so it's an honor to be here with you. Tell me let's just start with how this film came to be. Like, how did you end up making this with Senior, with Junior, with the family?
I actually I had a meeting at Robert Downey Jr.'s company, and in talking to them, kind of threw out the idea of potentially doing a documentary on Robert Downey Jr. And it was, I think, a couple of weeks later, I got word back that Robert had absolutely no interest in doing a documentary on himself, but he did think that somebody should start filming his father. He thought it would be a good subject. And that kind of started the process. I didn't really know what it was, what it would be. But it was, it just seemed like a good opportunity. And the more, I had known Putney Swope, I think as many people did, that, anyone that went to film school had probably seen it. But I wasn't as familiar with his other work. And so it was sort of like, as that world opened up, you saw this opportunity, and it was just, we couldn't have started at a better time, like he was so full of life. And it was the beginning was really, really exciting.
Yeah, my relationship with Senior's work was I worked at Kim's Video, and my good friend Sean Williams was obsessed. Like, he just was totally obsessed with Downey. He ended up actually doing that thing you might have seen for the Criterion Channel, that brief documentary about Senior. And he just threw me in deep into this world of Robert Downey Sr. And it's such a completely unique vision. I mean, what was it like then to be like, okay, I'm making a film about this guy. Now I get to explore this insane body of work. What did that feel like for you?
I was really intimidated to meet him, because when you look at the work, you assume that the person is going to be like a really acerbic, sort of judgmental, I don't know, like it definitely like always gave me the feeling that I don't know, that there'd be a much I don't know, tougher character there. And when we went to meet him, he was like the exact opposite, like he was so innocent in a way, and sort of just like playful and like curious. And and so to me that was probably the biggest like shock, and just in terms of meeting him and sort of starting the process.
Yeah, I mean, he comes off intimidating in the film itself. You can imagine how intimidating it was in real life. But that's the curiosity, the playfulness is there. What were his thoughts? I love the part where it's like, well, you're not going to call it Senior, are you? And it cuts to the title. I mean, just like you embodied the playfulness and of the relationship, it seems, between Senior, Junior, and you as a filmmaker in the edit of the film. But what was Senior's relationship with documentary filmmaking? He obviously had made some documentary films, but what, when you're like, we're going to make a documentary about you, what did he bring to that? What were his preconceived ideas about that?
I don't think that he looked at it as a documentary about himself. I think he just looked at it, oh, Robert's going to send these guys over with a camera. That means I got guys with cameras. That's good. And I think that's as far as he went. I think for him, it was like, this isn't going to go the way they think it's going to go, is what I think he really thought. And for him, it was just an opportunity to be back in the game, you know, and be back making something. And so for him, I don't think it was, I think he probably felt like, okay, these guys think they know what they're doing, but I'm going to do exactly what I want. And I'm going to, and, you know, I think it might have, you know, maybe it would have become contentious or something or other, but like he very quickly sort of just decamped and started doing his own thing. And at that point, it sort of left us alone to sort of keep working on, you know, on the other version of the documentary.
I love, I mean, it's one of my favorite things about the film is the idea of the senior cut where it cuts to where he's editing, he's going through it. It's, you know, there's all this discussion these days about like, you know, collaborating with participants in films but you're taking it a whole other level, which by the way, I feel like is a throwback to American Movie in a way. And in your other work, like you know, there's other versions of this throughout your work where you're essentially giving the screen up to your collaborator, which is the participant. There are times in the film where we see the senior cut play out. And which reminds me of when Coven takes over the screen in American Movie. It's a powerful and the steps towards when Coven took over. So talk about the senior cut. Where did that come from? It sounds like it came from him just being like, this is me, this is my project now, kind of.
Well, yeah, he very much was like, I think, well, he's like, I think this is gonna be easier for me to do this on my own over here. And so thankfully we had Kevin, who was, you know, one of our, you know, main collaborators. Kevin and I were shooting the film. Kevin kind of took over the senior portion of the film. So you see Kevin in a lot of the footage and he's cutting with senior endlessly and tirelessly. And it was, you know, he really did incredible work there. And it was just such, to me, a gift to think of the opportunity at this stage in life to be able to, I don't know, to just have a project like that you can focus on and sort of keep moving through. I can't imagine as a filmmaker anything better in terms of coexisting with the reality of the things that were unfolding.
Yeah, I mean, you see the sparkle in his eye when he's editing. I mean, it's really, which brings me to, you know, I don't want to overstate this, but it's a therapeutic project in a lot of ways. So I mean, and obviously it becomes about the end of Senior's life, but I think Junior has this great quote, you know, at some point in the film where he says, you know, when things happen, we turn on the camera. And so you were kind of stepping into that. How did you, you know, you knew, I mean, you know, as a documentary filmmaker, obviously that your camera can activate all kinds of things for the people being filmed. It can make people, it can help them. It could sometimes cause even harm. It could be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It could be the exact right place at the exact right time. And you know, all this, right? But like, you're stepping into a situation where Junior says that very powerful thing, which is when we're dealing with something, we turn on the camera. How did that affect your filmmaking?
The very first day that I filmed with Junior and Senior in the Hamptons, Junior came out and Robert said, well, the first thing he said is there's nothing off limits. And then he just kind of turned around and walked away while we were setting up. And we barely knew him at the time. You know, the one thing that he did, which was really brilliant, was right, I think it was a day or two before we were supposed to go, we got a message that we couldn't bring any crew, which was like really, I hadn't like picked up a camera in over 10 years. And so it was like a really new experience for me, like to pick up, I don't know, last time I shot was like cameras had tapes in them, you know, so like, you know, like it was or recorded, whatever. But it was, so that was, I think there was something so nice about that, because it like literally just brought me back to American Movie in a way. Like it just really felt like, oh wow, it was like me and one other person, and we're just like walking around and like making this thing. And there was something that, even though our crews are always small and you try to protect like the intimacy, I felt like that just took it up one more level, where there wasn't any of the production feeling around it. It was really just sort of just like hanging out with these two guys. In terms of them, being involved on camera, it's like they both grew up on camera, and they grew up with cameras. So there was like, I never felt like, oh, we're pulling out a camera, like change. I never felt like even a blink of an eye or like anything that changed, because I think it was just so normal.
So that you described that as brilliant, but that must have been stressful to be like, oh, by the way, whatever your plans were, throw them out.
Yeah, it was, every project you look at, you're like, how are we going to approach this? Are we going to use, Alexas, like higher end cameras? Are we going to use sort of like smaller cameras that maybe like have a different aesthetic quality? And I think that like by going a little more DIY with it, I think that it you don't know when you go into something like this, you don't know what the expectation is. You don't know if it's as a celebrity. I didn't know Robert at all. So I don't know if like, I knowing him now, it's very obvious that this is the way that it would unfold. But going into it, it's like, I don't know, does he want, the best camera, some people are like, do we have like, the highest quality equipment, and it was exactly the opposite with him, but it was life-changing for me, only in the sense that I was actually, it was what I needed to like get to be put in a position where I could start shooting again. And since then I've started shooting on a lot of the projects that I'm doing, and it's like, it's so liberating. And so it's like, between Robert sort of starting that process and then Senior's influence has forever impacted the way that I think about filmmaking, because he always was trying to embrace the looseness, I guess the chaos, I would say, of just like not being so rigid in the way that you approach filmmaking,
Yeah, and it really embodies the spirit of Senior, right? Like the black and white is obviously a choice. The film feels like a throwback in a lot of ways, because we're allowed to just spend time, in some of these scenes that play out, and you really get a sense of that playfulness, the looseness, the DIY aesthetic, and all of it really is Senior, right? It's a way that the form is embodying a sort of portraiture, right? Like you've come up with a form that speaks more spiritually to what he did, what kind of filmmaking he was known for.
Yeah, he was like, he was really against like sit down interviews. I mean, I know we have a master interview with Robert and things like that, but like he was definitely like, you see it right in the first shot where he's sitting on the couch. He's like, great shot, nobody's sitting, good movement, like, but in a way it was like, it was really exciting because you had somebody that was always challenging you. And I think that's why we're like, oh, well, I've never shot a documentary in black and white. And so when Kevin and I like tried it after the first day of shooting, we're like, yeah, that makes so much sense. And it felt so nice being in Senior's world, especially when you look at the early films, it's all this like black and white. And it felt like, oh, wow, this takes you into that space. And then when he jumps to color later, it feels even more like impactful, because you're like, oh, wow, this is like, it jumps off the screen. So there were a lot of things like that I think, you'd hope that you would have come to them on your own, but I think they were really inspired by spending time with him and sort of trying to absorb the lessons of creativity that he was trying to sort of share.
Yeah, and it honors him. Like there is a respect that it conveys, which I think is really crucial to the emotional sort of integrity of the film. Speaking of that, there's I lost my dad fairly recently, and just watching this film, I was really struck by the scene where Junior is in therapy, and just because of that, the universality of that, right? Just and his willingness to share that kind of vulnerability, because in some ways it connects with that other comment about when things happen, the film, we turn a camera on, and then there are moments where he's sort of calling out his dad a little bit, like subtly, gently and lovingly, knowing that it's, you're only going to get so far maybe with Senior, right? But but it's important for him to say a couple things. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the therapy aspect, seeing, I mean, first of all, how was that his idea to film that? Was that your
idea? Kevin shot that scene, and we kind of had a theory of just like always be rolling, always be shooting. And my understanding when that was actually happening was just that, that it wasn't like, oh, well, let's do the therapy scene at all. It was like Robert was doing therapy and Kevin kind of snuck in and was able to sort of capture it. And so it wasn't really, like not many of the things, but that in particular, when Robert's with his dad at the end, like Kevin left the camera, like there was no one in the room at that point, and so Kevin left an iPhone in the corner that is the only reason we have the two shot of both of them. And, so Robert was definitely not like, all right, let's make sure we get this covered. He wasn't really thinking in those terms, but he was open and not obstructionist to anything, but I think he was definitely not thinking in that moment so much about the film as much as about, life that was happening,
It's good to see him in therapy. I'm not going to ask you to be a armchair psychologist here, but you were with them. Was there some aspect, do you think there was some aspect of this film being about forgiveness for him?
Yeah, well, I think it was a lot of things, I think he talks about it, but I don't ever want to speak for someone else. So I hope there's some interview where he answers that question, but it definitely felt like it was a way to process, and Senior was excited, he was, you see right in the beginning, he's like, I definitely think this should be part of the film. And, there definitely felt like a full understanding that this was all part of it, and that's what makes movies great, is I think when you can embrace in an honest way the good and the bad. And I think that, to me, I'm still, take away the fact that it's Robert Downey Jr. or Sr., just the fact that they were open to allowing cameras to document this process, to me, is just still so remarkable in terms of, I don't know a lot of people that would want to do that,
Well, my theory as a viewer, which is, a lot of times that's what you're doing as a viewer, is you're coming up with the theory of why you're watching this film in some ways, is that they just knew that this was going to be what they needed to do,
Right.
And
I think so.
Yeah. And that's what I really liked about the film, was that there's, I guess I think that documentaries are often about processing. And we don't really, we're trying to tell stories, we're trying to do these other things with the films, but the reason why we're motivated to make them, and maybe the reason why people are motivated to say yes to being in them, is because there needs to be some processing. Right. And you allow that. I mean, a lot of the edit and obviously the presence of the camera, but even in the way that the film plays out, it feels like there is an acknowledgement, and not a heavy-handed one at all. Right. But just a gentle acknowledgement that both people and both main characters need to process what had happened to them, what's going on, the passing of life, getting through a pandemic, all of it.
Yeah, I think the important thing to realize, though, is that it wasn't like Senior got a diagnosis and we're like, let's document this process. Right. It was, we were making an entirely different movie. We were making a movie about Robert Downey Sr. and then these things transpired. So it wasn't like we went into it thinking that, I don't think that had we not started with Senior, I do not think that there would have been a movie that all of a sudden kicked into gear to document the end of his life. Like, I don't think that, I at least from my point of view, I don't see that as, that would have happened. I think it really was just, when we started, it was like he was so full of life. We went out to lunch, we walked, to a restaurant, and it's just, it's crazy when you think of just like the timing of it all, because it was literally like the last window that we had with him mobile and out there and in the world. And to me, I felt so lucky to be a part of it, only in the sense that I felt like we just captured the smallest bit of that life force that he had, but I think we just hopefully got enough that people can feel like they got to know this person, because, what was captured was great. But what's great about Senior is like, just like being in his presence was very was fun. You know, it's like he was a funny character. I remember we were driving back from Rockaway, and nobody was talking for a while, and we were like, I don't know where we were, but out of nowhere he just was like, Brooklyn, no thanks, and like it was like such a funny like line, and I was like, oh great, we weren't rolling, but you know, it was like things like that happened all the time.
Absolutely perfect. That scene you described, like you set up the camera in the final scene with him in bed, and I was really moved by it. From my personal experience of just the honesty of he still has that spark even in the last moments, but there's some incoherence, right? It's not like it's not sentimental at all, because there's a lot of you allow us to see what it really feels like in those final moments, and that sort of gentle. So obviously you talked about the camera, and that makes a lot of sense that there was no one else in the room except for Junior, his son, and Senior. But talk about the editing of that scene, because what you leave in is so profound and really with such a light touch as well.
Yeah, I mean, we worked with great editors. Kevin Ford was who was shooting and producing and editing with Senior and doing basically everything. Amanda Griffin. And in the last year, we worked with Dan Kohler, who I've worked with on a number of projects, who's I just think one of the greatest minds in editing. And it was a combination. Everybody pitched in, but you know, Dan was like really instrumental in sort of in sort of helping shape the overall structure. I think one of the things that was challenging about this is that we started with a lens of like a movie that was looking at Senior's body of work. And I think we kind of hung on to that for a long time, even though the movie had changed into a story about a family, about a father and son, about art, about meditation on life. And you know, at some point we realized that the movies sort of almost were mirrors to different parts of his life, right? And so we could look at whether it was Greaser's Palace was about the family, and Two Tons was about drug addiction. At the end, you know, it really, those scenes, I mean, it was sad because, you know, Robert really wanted to go confront his father and have this like dialogue, and then COVID hit, and we were supposed to film that. And that is sort of the impetus for these Zoom conversations it had. But I don't think that like that real conversation was going to be had until he got there in person. And by the time he got there, it sort of was just, to me, it was almost like, it felt so like it made so much sense. Of course, that's how it would end up. You know, by the time you get there and you set up the camera and you have this moment, it's not possible. And that there's something about that like says so much more than if the conversation never had happened in the first place. And like, so there were things like that were, but there was so much in that scene. I remember like just piecing together like the Charlie Parkinson's thing, like the fact that he had put in this movie that line, and that it like all of a sudden he like just out of nowhere sort of drifts off, and you think he's like disconnected, and then he like picks up a hairbrush and says that line. And there were things in there that, I guess, in the best of possible ways. I remember at the end of American Movie, for anyone that remembers, Mark's uncle was sitting on the porch and has this like soliloquy that was like sounded kind of like abstract, but also you could apply it to the real world, and it was like kind of profound. I felt like that whole interaction with Junior and Senior in the bedroom had that same quality, where it wasn't literal, but it was like figurative in a way that it's my favorite sort of things, where it just sort of, it says so much without having to say anything at all, you know, about the human experience and life and tragedy, and, you know, but they're still together. Like there's just was so much to it, you know, that like, and I think that like, I've always tried to play things more subtle than explicit and allow the audience to sort of formulate their own opinions. And so for us, it was really just trying to craft something that felt true to the experience and sensitive to the moment that we were let in on, you know?
it's really, it really exactly what you describe as the experience. You get the sense of almost like not desperate energy, but some energy with those Zoom calls that is very palpable, I think, to everyone, all of us that went through the pandemic. Like I said, my dad died during the pandemic too, like not because of it, but during. So it's almost, you really did, and I we're so close to it. It's hard to say this without it being like a smaller thing. It's a huge thing. You made a great film about that, about the subtle tragedies of the pandemic, really, like those day-to-day things. That scene where he's like, people are here for a party, you know, and they're zooming, and it's like it really lands. So I think everything you tried to do with that really does work, and it's incredibly moving. Let's end with this. Just what do you think, Senior, you know, having made this film, what do you think Senior's legacy is?
Oh, I mean, it's his body of work, you know, like, I mean, it's a great thing to leave behind, because you can, you know, what's funny is like, we talk often that like, and Robert says it in the movie, you know, that like, you don't like to be explicit. He says to his dad, you know, you don't like to be explicit about the meaning of anything. You like to leave that up to the audience, which I agree with. But it was funny, right near the end of the film, we had always ended with Robert in this hammock, and that always felt right to us. And near a couple months before we finished, Susan Downey just out of nowhere sent me this YouTube clip of the Bingo gas station motel cheeseburger scene from Greaser's Palace with no context. It was just like a link. And I watched it again. I was like, oh my God, it's like, it's there. That's it. That's like, you know, he did tell us what it was all about, and how to behave, and what we should do. And like, you know, and so like, for us, it felt really nice to be able to put that at the end, because it felt, it gave him that voice at the end. And I felt like that scene feels so perfect as an encapsulation of him, because it is maybe not the early Senior, you know, when he's on, but like where the Senior that I met, who, you know, just like, you know, talk about community and just like look after each other, be nice to each other, you know. And it was, you know, it's the simplest of message, yet it's sort of kind of all we need to know, you know.
And now every time I enter Brooklyn, I could say, Brooklyn, no thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
It's great to talk to you, Chris, and congratulations. Right. The movie is special, and I'm really, you know, just thrilled to be able to talk to you about it, because it meant a lot to me. And
thank you.